Growing up in Willow Creek, our little suburban neighborhood where everybody knew everybody, my grandpa was the kind of man people wished they had in their family. His name was Harold Whitman, but to me, he was simply Grandpa Harry. The man had this warm, wrinkled smile that could make a bad day feel lighter. He always had a joke in his back pocket and a story on the tip of his tongue. He wore suspenders even when he didn't have to, and his house always smelled like cinnamon and pipe tobacco. Some kids grow up with grandfathers who are distant or grumpy. Not me. Grandpa Harry was my safe place. My mom worked two jobs after my dad walked out when I was 6, so most afternoons after school, I went straight to his small, cozy house 2 streets over. The kitchen table was always set with a plate of cookies and 2 glasses of milk just waiting for me. We'd sit there for hours, and he'd tell me these whimsical stories about his adventures when he was young, about fishing trips gone wrong, road trips that turned into disasters, and a million other tales that always ended with him laughing so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. But here's the thing, I never once questioned if those stories were true. To me, Grandpa Harry was exactly who he appeared to be, a harmless old man who loved his family more than anything. And maybe that's why what happened later hit me like a train I never saw coming. I remember one particular spring afternoon when I was around 10 years old. The sky was this perfect shade of blue, and the cherry blossoms in the front yard were in full bloom. I was coloring at the kitchen table while Grandpa sat in his recliner, puffing on his pipe and staring out the window like he was lost in thought. Then he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "You know, Ellie, sometimes the truth is like an old photograph. You keep it tucked away because if you look at it too long, it changes the way you see everything else." I laughed because I didn't understand it, but he just smiled at me, this sad, faraway kind of smile, and went back to staring outside. At the time, it meant nothing. But years later, those words would haunt me. My mom always said Grandpa was a little quirky, but insisted he was harmless. Still, there were moments when I caught her looking at him in a way I couldn't quite explain, like she knew something about him that I didn't. But whenever I asked, she'd just change the subject or say, "It's nothing, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." By the time I was 16, my relationship with Grandpa had only grown stronger. High school was a battlefield of fake friends, gossip, and endless pressure, but at Grandpa's house, I could breathe. He never judged me, never told me to smile more or stop being so dramatic like other adults did. He just listened. It wasn't until my mom went missing that year that the cracks started to show. It happened in early November, just after daylight savings time ended. I came home from school one day to find my aunt sitting on the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. She told me Mom had left for work that morning and never showed up. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car wasn't in the parking lot at the diner where she worked. At first, everyone assumed it was some kind of misunderstanding. But days turned into weeks, and the police investigation turned up nothing. Grandpa didn't talk much during that time. In fact, he barely left his house. When I visited, he'd sit in his recliner with the TV on but never watch it. I thought he was just heartbroken, and maybe he was. But there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't name back then. Life went on, or at least pretended to. My mom's case went cold. My aunt moved in to take care of me. And Grandpa went back to telling stories, though sometimes I noticed he'd stop mid-sentence, like his mind had wandered somewhere dark. It wasn't until 3 years later, after Grandpa passed away, that I found the dusty box in his garage. And that's when the version of him I'd carried in my heart all my life began to unravel. The day I found the box, I wasn't looking for anything. I had gone over there with my aunt to start sorting through his things. It was one of those bitterly cold January mornings where your breath hangs in the air like smoke. My aunt was inside, going through kitchen drawers, while I decided to tackle the garage. The place was like a museum of Grandpa's life. Shelves lined with old tools, fishing rods, boxes of holiday decorations. The smell of motor oil and cedar hit me the moment I opened the door. That's when I saw it, tucked away behind a stack of paint cans, covered in a thick layer of dust. a plain cardboard box, sealed with yellowed masking tape. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't labeled like the other boxes. It wasn't stored neatly. It was hidden. I dragged it out, my fingers leaving trails in the dust, and pulled at the brittle tape until it gave way. The flaps creaked open, and inside, beneath layers of old newspaper, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A stack of faded photographs. A manila envelope with police insignia on the corner. And at the very bottom, a small, silver locket I recognized instantly. It was my mom's. The same one she wore every single day until the morning she disappeared. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the photographs first. Most were black and white, but a few were in color, and they weren't the kind of family pictures you'd expect. In almost every single one, my grandpa was standing next to people I didn't recognize, men in suits, women in headscarves, all in strange, dimly lit locations. And in more than one, he wasn't smiling. I don't know how long I stood there, staring, my hands shaking. But I knew in that moment that my sweet, storytelling grandpa had a past I knew nothing about. And whatever it was connected to my mom's disappearance. That's when I heard my aunt calling for me from the kitchen. I shoved the contents back into the box, sealed it with my hands, and told her I was just looking through some junk. But inside, my mind was racing. I had to know the truth. And if the truth was like an old photograph, like Grandpa once said, then I was about to stare at it until it burned into my memory forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the silver locket in my hand, the one my mom never went a day without wearing. I remembered how she used to absently twist it between her fingers when she was nervous. She once told me it was a gift from someone important, but when I asked who, she just smiled faintly and changed the subject. Now it was sitting in a box that had clearly been hidden in my grandpa's garage 3 years after she vanished without a trace. The more I thought about it, the more everything about Grandpa's behavior after she disappeared started to feel suspicious. How quiet he became. How he never went to the police station with me and my aunt. How he avoided looking at me when I asked if he thought she'd come back. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he'd found the locket somewhere and kept it because he didn't want to upset me. Maybe the photographs and the police envelope were from some unrelated part of his past. But deep down, I knew it was all connected. The next day, I made an excuse to go back to Grandpa's house alone. My aunt thought I was meeting a friend, but I walked straight there, my heart pounding with every step. The box was right where I'd hidden it behind a stack of old blankets in the garage. I carried it inside and set it on the dining room table. The first thing I opened was the manila envelope. Inside were several sheets of paper, official police reports from the 1970s. The typewritten text was faded, but I could still read the words. The reports described an unsolved disappearance of a young woman named Margaret Lane. She had vanished in 1974, last seen leaving a local bar late at night. I'd never heard of her. But as I read further, my stomach dropped. According to the report, the primary suspect at the time was Harold Whitman, my grandpa. He was questioned multiple times but never charged due to insufficient evidence. The file didn't say why he was suspected, but it mentioned several witnesses who saw him speaking with Margaret shortly before she disappeared. I stared at the words until they blurred. This couldn't be real. Grandpa, my kind, gentle grandpa, suspected of a crime? And not just any crime. A disappearance. I moved on to the photographs. Some looked like they were taken decades ago, showing Grandpa as a much younger man. But others were more recent, taken within the last 15 years. One in particular made my blood run cold. It was my mom, standing outside what looked like an old motel. She wasn't smiling. In fact, she looked tense, almost scared. And in the corner of the photograph, barely visible, was my grandpa's hand gripping her arm. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. I froze. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see someone watching me from the street. But there was no one there. Still, the message sent a shiver down my spine. How could anyone know what I was doing? I put the phone face down and kept going through the box, my hands trembling. At the very bottom was something wrapped in cloth. I unfolded it and found an old leather-bound notebook. The first few pages were filled with names, dates, and places, most of them from decades ago. But then I found an entry from the year my mom disappeared. It was short, almost cryptic. She knows. Can't let her talk. My throat tightened. The handwriting was definitely Grandpa's. I recognized the way he looped his G's and crossed his T's. My vision swam as my mind tried to make sense of it. Did this mean my mom had found out something about him? Something so dangerous he was afraid she would tell someone? I slammed the notebook shut and shoved everything back into the box. My hands were slick with sweat, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. On the walk home, my thoughts were a tangled mess. I wanted to tell my aunt, but part of me was terrified of what she'd say or what she might already know. And then there was that text message. Someone was watching me. That night, I lay in bed replaying every memory I had of Grandpa. The way he'd sometimes pause in the middle of telling a story, as if he'd just remembered something he didn't want to say. The strange, almost guilty look in his eyes the last time I saw him before he passed. The words he'd told me years ago about truth being like an old photograph. I knew one thing for certain. If I didn't find out the truth about my mom, it would eat me alive. The next morning, I decided to start with the only person I thought might be able to help me, an old neighbor named Mrs. Carmichael. She lived next door to Grandpa for more than 40 years and knew everybody's business. When I knocked on her door, she looked surprised to see me. Her hair was thinner, her skin more wrinkled than I remembered, but her eyes were still sharp. "Ellie," she said slowly, "I heard about your grandpa. I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded. "Thanks. I was wondering if I could ask you something. About my mom. And maybe about Grandpa." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. Her living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. We sat on her floral print couch, and I told her, carefully, that I'd found some things in Grandpa's garage that didn't make sense. When I mentioned the name, Margaret Lane, her face changed. "Oh dear," she murmured, looking away. I never thought I'd hear that name again. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your grandfather was a good man to many people. But there were rumors. Things people didn't say out loud back then. About Margaret. About other women." "What kind of rumors?" I asked. Mrs. Carmichael sighed, her hands twisting in her lap. "That he had a temper. That sometimes people who crossed him just disappeared." I felt the air leave my lungs. She must have seen the shock on my face because she patted my hand gently. "Be careful, Ellie. The truth has a way of pulling you into places you might not be able to get out of." Her warning only made me more determined. Because if my grandpa really had something to do with my mom's disappearance, I wasn't going to stop until I knew exactly what happened. Even if it meant uncovering things that would change the way I saw him forever. I left Mrs. Carmichael's house with my mind spinning. Her words echoed in my head: rumors, temper, disappearance. It felt like the version of Grandpa I'd carried all my life was slipping away, replaced by someone I barely recognized. But it wasn't enough to just hear whispers from a neighbor. I needed proof. That night, I spread everything from the dusty box out on my bedroom floor. The photographs, the notebook, the police reports, the locket, they all sat there like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. I opened my laptop and started searching for anything I could find on Margaret Lane, Willow Creek, 1974. To my surprise, there were still old newspaper archives online. One headline from August 1974 read, "Local woman missing, foul play suspected." The article mentioned Margaret being last seen leaving O'Malley's bar, and witnesses describing her speaking with a man in his early 30s, tall, wearing a brown jacket. No name was given, but my stomach tightened as I realized Grandpa would have been in his early 30s in 1974. Scrolling further, I found another article from a few weeks later. Search for Margaret Lane stalls. Suspect released. This one actually mentioned Grandpa by name. It said he'd been questioned for hours but released without charges due to a lack of physical evidence. The police reportedly kept an open file on the case for years before closing it in the late 80s. I sat back, staring at the screen. Grandpa had never once told me about this part of his life. Not one word. I was still trying to process it when I got another text from the same unknown number. You don't know what you're getting into. Walk away. My heart thudded. I quickly typed back, "Who is this?" But the message wouldn't send. It came back as "number not in service." That was it. I wasn't walking away. The next day, I skipped my college classes and went to the Willow Creek Police Department. The building was small and outdated, with wood-paneled walls and the faint smell of burnt coffee. A tired-looking receptionist sat behind the front desk. "Hi," I said, trying to sound calm. "I was wondering if there's any way I could look at a closed case file. It's from the 70s. The disappearance of Margaret Lane?" She gave me a flat look. "You'd have to file a formal request, and even then, we can't release certain information to civilians." I hesitated, then blurted out, "She might be connected to my mom's disappearance." That made her pause. She glanced over her shoulder before leaning closer. "Look, off the record. That case was a mess. There were leads that went nowhere, evidence that got lost. But if you're saying there's a link..." She wrote something on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. "Talk to Detective Cole. He worked cold cases for years before he retired. If anyone knows the details, it's him." I left with the address on the note, my pulse racing. Detective Cole lived in a modest one-story house on the edge of town. When he answered the door, he was wearing a faded t-shirt and had the kind of posture that said he'd spent decades in a job that weighed on him. "You must be Ellie," he said after I introduced myself. "Come in." We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him everything, finding the box, the photographs, the police reports, even the text from the unknown number. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "Your grandfather, Harold Whitman, was a complicated man. When Margaret disappeared, all the signs pointed to him. Witnesses saw them together that night. He was the last known person to speak to her. But without a body, without physical evidence, there was nothing we could do. And then, it all just faded away." "Why was he even talking to her?" I asked. Cole hesitated. "Rumor was they were involved." Quietly. But Margaret was planning to leave town and tell someone something that would have destroyed Harold's life. No one ever figured out what it was. My throat tightened. "And my mom? Do you think?" He leaned forward. "I think your mom started asking the same questions you're asking now. And sometimes, asking questions gets you answers you can't survive." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Before I left," he said, "be careful, Ellie. If someone's watching you, they're watching for a reason. And if Harold was involved in something, there may still be people who want it buried." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Cole said. If Grandpa had been hiding something for over 50 years, it wasn't just about Margaret. My mom must have stumbled onto something far bigger. And now, I was following her footsteps. When I got home, I found my bedroom door slightly ajar. I was sure I'd closed it that morning. I rushed inside, and my stomach dropped. The box from Grandpa's garage was gone. I stood frozen in my bedroom doorway, staring at the empty spot on the floor where the box had been. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped my phone. That box was the only proof I had: photographs, police reports, my mom's locket, and now it was gone. Someone had been in my room. The first thing I did was tear through the rest of my things, looking for any sign that something else was missing. My drawers had been rifled through. A couple of books on my desk were shifted slightly out of place. But nothing else seemed taken, just the box. Whoever it was, they knew exactly what they came for. I ran downstairs, half expecting to see my aunt watching TV or cooking dinner. But the house was silent. Her car wasn't in the driveway. She'd left a note on the fridge. Running errands. Back later. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. I locked every door and window, then sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand, debating whether to call the police. But what would I even say? That I had evidence from a 50-year-old disappearance tied to my mom's case, but it was stolen from my room? They'd probably think I was crazy. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Last warning. Stop. This time, I didn't respond. Instead, I took a deep breath and called Detective Cole. Ellie? His voice was tense. They took it, I said. The box. Everything in it. Someone was in my house while I was gone. He swore under his breath. Listen to me. This isn't just about your grandfather anymore. If someone's willing to break into your home, they're scared of what you might find next. You need to be careful. And you need to get out of there. Get out? Go where? Do you trust your aunt? I hesitated. I think so. That's not a yes, he said grimly. Until you know who's involved and who isn't, assume no one is safe to talk to. Pack a bag. Stay somewhere else tonight. I'll come by in the morning. I hung up, my chest tight, and started shoving clothes into a backpack. My plan was to head to a motel on the far side of town, pay cash, and keep my head down. But as I was about to leave, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. My aunt's car. She walked in, carrying grocery bags, and gave me a quick smile before her eyes flicked to my backpack. Going somewhere? I froze. I was going to stay at a friend's place tonight. Her smile faded. Which friend? For a second, I almost told her everything. Almost. But something in her expression, too curious, too sharp, made me swallow the words. Jenna. You don't know her. She set the groceries down. You've been acting strange lately. Is something going on? I'm fine, I lied, moving toward the door. That's when I noticed it. On her left wrist, half hidden by her sweater sleeve, was a faint smear of dust. The same kind of fine, gray dust that had coated the box in Grandpa's garage. I left without another word. The motel I chose was small, tucked behind a gas station, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. I paid cash for the room and locked the door behind me. The bedspread smelled faintly of bleach, and the TV was a fuzzy mess of static and bad channels, but it felt safer than my own house. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every shadow under the door made my heart race. Around 3 a.m., I sat up and started scrolling through my phone, going back over the photographs I'd secretly snapped of the documents from the box before it was stolen. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In one of the photographs, the one of my mom outside the motel, there was a sign in the background. The letters were faded, but I could just make out the name. Pinecrest Inn. I didn't recognize it. A quick search told me it had closed down nearly 20 years ago. But it was still standing, just an abandoned shell on the outskirts of town. And it was less than a 30-minute drive from where I was. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every logical part of me said not to go there in the middle of the night, alone. But I also knew if I waited, whatever clues might still be there could disappear, just like the box. I grabbed my keys. The drive was quiet, the road lit only by my headlights. When I finally saw the crumbling sign for Pinecrest Inn, I pulled over and killed the engine. The building was a sagging, 2-story structure with boarded up windows and graffiti covering the walls. The air smelled faintly of mildew and damp earth. I pushed the front door open, and it creaked loudly. Inside, the floor was littered with broken furniture and shards of glass. My flashlight beam cut through the dust, catching glimpses of peeling wallpaper and long-forgotten furniture. Room after room was empty until I reached the one at the end of the hall. The door was shut, but not locked. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me first, musty, with a faint metallic tang. The room looked like the others, except for one thing. In the center of the floor was a small, rusted lockbox. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I pried it open with the edge of my flashlight. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, my mom, sitting on the edge of a bed in this very room. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. And standing in the background, half in shadow, was my grandpa. And he wasn't smiling. I stared at the Polaroid, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. The room around me seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of everything I didn't want to believe. My mom looked terrified. My grandpa looked different. Not the warm, laughing man who baked cookies and told silly stories. This man's expression was sharp, cold, almost calculating. I knew then that whatever had happened to my mom, it had happened here. I took the photograph and shoved it into my jacket pocket, then searched the rest of the lockbox. There was nothing else, just a scrap of paper with a single word written in my grandpa's handwriting, Lane. Margaret Lane. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and nearly dropped it when I saw my aunt standing in the doorway. Ellie, she said, her voice calm, too calm. You shouldn't be here. My throat went dry. How did you find me? Her eyes flicked to the Polaroid in my hand. Because you're following the same trail your mother did. And I couldn't let you make the same mistake. What are you talking about? I demanded. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Your mother found out what Harold did to Margaret Lane. He was involved with her, until she threatened to go public about something they were both mixed up in. She wasn't just some random woman, Ellie. Margaret was part of a group running money and goods across state lines. Illegal things. Dangerous people. My stomach turned. And Grandpa was part of it? Yes, she said softly. He got in too deep. When Margaret decided to talk, she disappeared. And your mother? She started digging just like you. She found the motel. She found the box. And then, her voice faltered. Harold made sure she couldn't tell anyone. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. You're saying Grandpa killed Mom? She hesitated. He didn't do it himself. But he made the call. And I helped him cover it up. I backed away, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear her. You helped? Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was protecting the family. I thought if it came out, it would destroy everything. I didn't realize it would haunt me every single day. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I took the box from your room, she admitted. I was trying to protect you from this. Once you saw the truth, there would be no going back. My hands curled into fists. I deserve to know what happened to my mom. She took a step closer. Then you need to understand, if you tell anyone, the people Grandpa worked with, they'll come after you. Just like they came after her. I reached into my pocket and gripped the Polaroid. I'm not going to let her just be another cold case. I don't care who I have to face. Her expression hardened. Then you're going to get yourself killed. Before I could answer, a noise echoed from down the hallway, footsteps, heavy and slow. My aunt's face went pale. They followed me here, she whispered. Panic surged through me. We had seconds to move. I darted past her, yanking the door open, and we sprinted down the hall. The front entrance loomed ahead, but a shadow blocked the doorway, a tall figure I couldn't make out in the dim light. We bolted for the side exit, bursting into the cold night air. My car was still where I'd left it, and we dove inside. Tires squealed as I tore out of the parking lot, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. We didn't speak until we were miles away. My aunt stared out the window, her face drawn. You need to disappear for a while. If you want to survive, you have to let this go. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The next morning, I went straight to Detective Cole. I handed him the Polaroid, told him everything my aunt had confessed, and gave him the location of the motel and the lockbox. He listened without interrupting, his expression grim. This is enough to reopen both cases, he said. But if your aunt's right, there are still people out there who won't want this to come to light. I knew the danger wasn't over. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. My mom's name wouldn't just fade into the background like Margaret Lane's had. A week later, the police found human remains buried behind the Pinecrest Inn. Dental records confirmed what I already knew in my gut. They were my mother's. Standing at her grave, I thought about all the stories Grandpa had told me growing up, the laughter we'd shared, the man I thought he was. And I realized that every smile, every gentle word, had been built on a foundation of lies. But the truth was out now. And no matter how much it hurt, I knew I'd never stop telling her story loud enough for the whole world to hear. Because some truths shouldn't stay hidden. Not for 50 years. Not ever.